Holland at least, since in Poland the killers seem to be in full cry. But though my mind has come to terms with it all, my body hasn't. It has disintegrated into 1,000 pieces, and each piece has a different pain. All this devouring of books from early youth has been nothing but laziness on my part. I allow others to formulate what I ought to be formulating myself. I keep seeking outside confirmation of what is hidden deep inside me, when I know that I can only reach clarity by using my own words. I really must abandon all that laziness, and particularly my inhibitions and insecurity, if I am ever to find myself, and through myself find others. Sunday morning, 10:30. A discussion between S and L about Christ and the Jews. Two philosophies, sharply defined, brilliantly presented, rounded off, defended with passion and vigour. But I can't help feeling that every hotly championed philosophy hides a little lie, that it must needs fall short of the truth, and yet I myself will have to find a philosophy to live by, a fenced-in space of my own, violently seized and passionately defended. But then, wouldn't that be giving life short change? The alternative may well be floundering in uncertainty and chaos, but that it may. After that discussion I went home, feeling deeply stirred, although I couldn't help wondering, isn't it all a lot of nonsense? Why do people work themselves into such a passion? Aren't they deluding themselves? That doubt always looms at the back of my mind. 27th of February, Friday morning, 10 o'clock. How rash to assert that man shapes his own destiny. All he can do is determine his inner responses. You cannot know another's inner life from his circumstances. To know that, you must know his dreams, his relationships, his moods, his disappointments, his sickness, and his death. Very early on Wednesday morning a large group of us were crowded into the Gestapo hall, and at that moment the circumstances of all our lives were the same. All of us occupied in the same space, the men behind the desk no less than those about to be questioned. What distinguished each one of us was only our inner attitudes. I noticed a young man with a sullen expression who paced up and down, looking driven and harassed, but making no attempt to hide his irritation. He kept looking for pretexts to shout at the helpless Jews, "Take your hands out of your pockets," and so on. I thought him more pitiable than those he shouted at, and those he shouted at I thought pitiable for being afraid of him. When it was my turn to stand in front of his desk, he bawled at me, "What the hell's so funny?" I wanted to say, "Nothing's funny here, except you," but refrained. "You're still smirking," he bawled again, and I, in all innocence, I didn't mean to, it's my usual expression, and he, "Don't give me that. I'll get the hell out of here," his face saying, "I'll deal with you later." And that was presumably meant to scare me to death, but the device was too transparent. I am not easily frightened, but not because I am brave, but because I know that I am dealing with human beings, and that I must try as hard as I can to understand everything that anyone ever does. And that was the real import of this morning. Not that a disgruntled young Gestapo officer yelled at me, but that I felt no indignation, rather a real compassion, and would have liked to ask, "Did you have a very unhappy childhood? Has your girlfriend let you down?" Yes, he looked harassed and driven, sullen and weak. I should have liked to start treating him there and then, for I know that pitiful young men like that are dangerous as soon as they are let loose on mankind. But all the blame must be put on the system that uses such people. What needs eradicating is the evil in man, not man himself. 3rd of March 1942, Tuesday evening, 9 p.m. We are not allowed to walk along the promenade any longer, and every miserable little clump of 2 or 3 trees has been pronounced a wood with a board nailed up, "No admittance to Jews." More and more of these boards are appearing all over the place. Nevertheless, there is still enough room for one to move and live and be happy and play music and love each other. Glasner brought a little sack of coal and tea to some wood, sugar and biscuits. I had some tea, and our small Swiss vegetarian artist suddenly arrived with a big cake. First read to us all about Hugo Wolf, and when he came to some passages about Wolf's tragic life, his mouth quivered a little. That's another reason why I love him so much. He is so genuine. "7th of March 1942, Saturday morning. It has turned 11:30 a.m. I must still type out of that talk with Hetty. Things like that are awfully difficult, and my programme now includes The Idiot, which I have neglected for a long time, and Jung's Symbols of Transformation, of which I found a tattered copy in S.'s library. And at 6:30 I have to meet S, and then with him and Glasner to the L's. I am most curious about Liesel's cooking, and tomorrow afternoon music at my place, and so on. March 1942, Sunday evening, 9:30 p.m. I looked round my desk. There were 2 volumes of Rilke's letters. I really must read them systematically, and in the near future too. Then there was the book by Jung on which I had started, and Dostoevsky's Idiot, that has to be properly studied for its language no less than its contents. My growing numbers of pupils forces me to perfect my knowledge of the language all the time. And then there is the work for S. I must keep myself ready for him, must be open to him, to learn, to share his way of experiencing things. There is always something new to learn from him, always a little more. But at the same time, I must not neglect my Russian studies. March 1942. Regards S. I am so glad that he is a Jew and I a Jewess, and I shall do what I can to remain with him so that we can get through these times together. And I shall tell him this evening, I am not really frightened of anything. I feel so strong. It matters little whether you have to sleep on a hard floor, or whether you are allowed to walk with certain specified streets, and so on. These are all minor vexations, so insignificant compared to the infinite riches and possibilities that we carry within us. "3rd of March, 9 p.m. Last night S brought back a bunch of tulips, the small red buds and the tiny white ones, so tight, so inaccessible, so incredibly dear. I had them to look at all afternoon while listening to Hugo Wolf. The Rijksmuseum, too, was there outside the window, so invitingly fresh and new in all its contours, and at the same time so old and familiar. Thursday, 6 o'clock, March 1942. I once quietly bemoaned the fact that there is so little space for our physical love in your 2 small rooms, and no chance of going elsewhere because of all these notices and prohibitions, and now it seems a veritable paradise of promise and freedom, your little rooms. Your small table, lamp, my lilac soap, and your gentle caressing hands. God knows how much that means to our relationship, to all that may lie in store for us. Now that I worry unduly about the future, you can't tell how things will turn out in the long run, and so I don't bother too much about it. But if things are to be harder for us, I am quite ready to bear it. The 18th of May 1942. The threat grows ever greater, and terror increases from day to day. I draw prayer round me like a dark, protective wall, withdraw inside it as one might into a convent cell, and then step outside again, calmer and stronger, and more collected again. I can imagine times to come when I shall stay on my knees for days on end, waiting until the protective walls are strong enough to prevent my going to pieces altogether, my being lost and utterly devastated. June 1942. God is not accountable to us, but we are to him. I know what may lay in wait for us. Even now I am cut off from my parents and cannot reach them, although they are only 2 hours by train away. But I know exactly where they are, and that they aren't going short of food, and that there are many kind people all around them, and they know where I am too. But I am also aware that there may come a time when I shan't know where they are, when they might be deported to perish miserably in some unknown place. I know this is perfectly possible. The latest news is that all Jews will be transported out of Holland through Drenthe province and then on to Poland. And the English radio has reported that 700,000 Jews perished last year alone, in Germany and the occupied territories. And even if we stay alive, we shall carry the wounds with us throughout our lives. And yet I don't think life is meaningless. And God is not accountable to us for the senseless harm we cause one another. We are accountable to him. I have already died 1,000 deaths in 1,000 concentration camps. I know everything. I am no longer appalled by the latest reports. In one way or another I know it all, and yet I find life beautiful and meaningful from minute to minute. June 1942. Humiliation always involves two, the one who does the humiliating and the one who allows himself to be humiliated. If the second is missing, that is, if the passive party is immune to humiliation, then the humiliation vanishes into thin air. All that remains are vexatious measures which interfere with daily life, but are not humiliations that weigh heavily on the soul. We Jews should remember that. This morning I cycled along the station quay, enjoying the broad sweep of fresh, unrationed air, and everywhere signs barring Jews from paths and the open country. But above the one narrow path still left to us stretches the sky, intact. They can't do anything to us, they really can't. They can harass us, they can rob us of our material goods, of our freedom, of movement, but we ourselves forfeit our greatest assets by our misguided compliance, by our feelings of being persecuted, humiliated, and oppressed, by our hatred, by our swagger which hides our fear. July 1942. A contentment that rests in God. Something elemental flows out of the Old Testament, and something homely as well. Splendid people live in its pages, poetic and austere. The Bible is so rugged and tender, simple and wise, and so full of wonderful characters too. 1st of July 1942. My mind has assimilated everything that has happened in these last few days. So far the rumours have been infinitely worse than the reality, for us in Holland at least, since in Poland the killers seem to be in full cry. But though my mind has come to terms with it all, my body hasn't. It has disintegrated into 1,000 pieces, and each piece has a different pain.